The night my future disappeared didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, like a decision already made without me in the room. I was 21, sitting at the small dining table with my acceptance letter spread out in front of me, rereading it for the 100th time like it might suddenly vanish if I looked away too long. A full scholarship. Not just tuition, housing, books, everything. It was my way out. My way forward. For the first time in my life, something belonged only to me. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe to my channel, but only if this story resonates with you, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is there? That's when my mother walked in, followed by my father, both unusually calm. Too calm. Sit properly, my father said, his voice carrying that controlled tone that always meant something serious was coming. I straightened instinctively, folding the letter as if I needed to protect it. What's going on? I asked, already feeling a strange weight settle in my chest. My mother didn't answer right away. She kept wringing her hands, eyes avoiding mine. That's when I knew whatever was coming wasn't small. It's about your sister, my father finally said. That was enough to make my stomach drop. Layla had always been the center of everything. My favorite. The one whose mistakes were somehow always misunderstood. I was the responsible one, the fixer, the one expected to clean up after the storms she left behind. What did she do? I asked, already bracing myself. She's pregnant. The words didn't hit me immediately. They just hung there, heavy and unreal. She's 17, my mother added softly, like that detail might soften the blow instead of making it worse. I exhaled slowly, trying to process it. Okay. So what does that have to do with me? That's when my father leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table. Everything. I felt my grip tighten around the edge of the chair. I don't understand. You will, he said. Because this situation is delicate. We cannot allow this to ruin her future. I stared at him, waiting for the rest. For the part where they explained how they planned to support her, or what they expected from me in terms of helping out occasionally. But that part never came. Instead, my mother finally looked at me, her eyes glassy but determined. When the baby is born, you're going to take him. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Take him? I repeated, a nervous laugh slipping out before I could stop it. What do you mean, take him? You'll raise him, my father said, as if he were assigning me a chore. As your own. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. That's not funny, I said, even though no one was smiling. I'm leaving in 3 months. I have school. You won't be going, he interrupted. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I earned that, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I worked for years. I got the grades, the recommendations, everything. You can't just take that away from me. This is not about you, my father replied coldly. This is about family. Exactly, I shot back. So why isn't she the one dealing with it? It's her baby. My mother finally spoke again, her voice trembling but firm. She's too young. She has her whole life ahead of her. One mistake shouldn't destroy everything. And mine should? I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. No one answered that. The silence told me everything I needed to know. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not doing this. I'm not giving up my life because she made a choice. My father's expression hardened. Then the child goes into the system. That stopped me cold. What? If you refuse, he continued, his tone completely detached now, we will not raise the baby. We will not support it. It will be placed with strangers. And your sister will move on with her life. I stared at him, searching for any sign that this was a bluff. But there was none. You're lying, I said weakly. I'm not, he replied. So you have a decision to make. Either you step up for your family, or you walk away, knowing exactly what will happen to that child. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My chest tightened, my thoughts racing in 100 different directions at once. This wasn't a choice. It was a trap disguised as one. Why me? I whispered. Because you're the only one who can handle it, my mother said, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away before she could touch me. No. That wasn't the reason. The real reason was because I was the only one they knew would say yes. I looked down at the folded acceptance letter still clutched in my hand. For years, it had been my escape plan. My proof that I could build something different for myself. And now, it felt like a piece of paper from a life I was no longer allowed to have. When is she due? I asked quietly. My father didn't hesitate. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That was all the time I had left before everything changed. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to imagine what it would feel like to walk away. To pack my bags, get on that plane, and pretend none of this was my responsibility. But every version of that future ended the same way, with a child I had never met, growing up somewhere out there, unwanted, because I had chosen myself. And somehow, that felt worse than losing everything. When I opened my eyes again, my decision was already made. I'll do it, I said, the words tasting like something bitter I couldn't swallow. I'll take the baby. My mother let out a shaky breath, relief flooding her face. My father simply nodded, as if everything had gone exactly as expected. No one said thank you. No one apologized. And just like that, my future ended, not with a fight, not with a choice, but with a quiet surrender no one would ever acknowledge. I didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't just the moment I lost my life. It was the moment I unknowingly stepped into a role that someone else would try to steal from me, years later, in front of everyone who had once watched me give everything up. And next time, I wouldn't be the one surrendering. 6 weeks later, I held him for the first time, and nothing about it felt the way people always said it would. There was no overwhelming rush of love. No magical moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just a tiny, fragile human wrapped in a hospital blanket, sleeping through the storm he had been born into, completely unaware that his existence had already rewritten someone else's life. Mine. Do you want to hold your son properly? The nurse asked gently, adjusting my arms. The word hit me harder than it should have. Son. I almost corrected her. Almost told her the truth, that he wasn't mine, that I was just the one left standing when everyone else stepped back. But I didn't. Because technically, by then, he was. Layla had signed the papers the same day she gave birth. No hesitation. No tears. Just a quick signature and a distracted glance at her phone while the nurse walked her through it. I remember watching her from across the room, waiting, hoping, for something. Regret. Doubt. Anything. There was nothing. Can I see him later? She had asked casually, already halfway out the door. Of course, the nurse replied. But she never came back. By the time I was discharged, I had a diaper bag in one hand and a responsibility I had never asked for in the other. My parents drove us home in silence, like this was just another task checked off their list. And then, just like that, it was over. They had done their part. The rest was mine. The first few months were a blur of exhaustion and quiet panic. No one prepares you for how relentless it is. How the nights bleed into mornings without pause, how your entire world shrinks to feeding schedules, crying fits, and the constant fear that you're doing something wrong. I learned everything the hard way. How to mix formulas at 3 in the morning while half asleep. How to calm him down when nothing seemed to work. How to function on 2 hours of sleep and still show up to the part-time job I had taken because dreams didn't pay bills, but diapers needed to be bought. My scholarship expired 2 weeks after he was born. I didn't even bother opening the final email. I named him Ayan. Not because anyone suggested it, but because I wanted something that was ours. Something untouched by the circumstances that brought him into my life. And slowly, without me realizing it, things began to shift. It wasn't a single moment. It wasn't dramatic. It was small things. The way his tiny hand would wrap around my finger like it was the only thing grounding him. The way he'd stop crying the second I picked him up, like he already knew I was the one who would stay. The way he looked at me, really looked at me, as if I was the entire world he understood. That's when it started to change. Not all at once, but enough. The resentment didn't disappear, but it softened. It became something quieter, buried under routine and responsibility and a bond one hadn't planned, but couldn't ignore. He wasn't the reason my life had been taken from me anymore. He was the reason I kept going. My parents stayed involved, but only in the way that made them feel good about themselves. They'd visit occasionally, bringing toys or clothes, staying just long enough to take pictures and remind themselves they were still part of the story. But they never stayed for the hard parts. Never offered to help with the nights, the sickness, the moments when I felt like I was barely holding everything together. And Layla? She vanished. At first, there were occasional messages. Short, detached check-ins that felt more like obligations than genuine interest. How is he? Send a picture. Hope everything's okay. Then those stopped too. Months turned into years, and her absence became normal. Like she had never existed in his life at all. I told myself it was better that way. Easier. Cleaner. But sometimes, late at night, when Ayan was finally asleep and the apartment was too quiet, I'd think about it. About how someone could walk away so completely. About how easy it had been for her to choose herself, when I never got that option. By the time Ayan turned 5, we had found a rhythm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was ours. I had moved into a slightly bigger place, still small, still modest, but enough space for him to have his own room. I picked up extra shifts, learned how to stretch every rupee, how to make something out of almost nothing. And through all of it, he grew. Smart. Observant. Quiet in a way that made people underestimate him, but I saw it. The way his mind worked, the way he noticed things others missed. "Why don't I have a dad?" he asked me once, out of nowhere, while we were sitting on the floor building a puzzle. The question hit harder than anything else ever had. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Some families look different," I said. "Ours is just, you and me." He nodded slowly, like he was filing that answer away for later. "Okay." He didn't push. But I knew that day would come. What I didn't know, was that someone else was waiting for that same moment. Not to answer his questions. But to rewrite them completely. Because while I was busy building a life from what I had left, someone else was out there, living theirs like none of this had ever happened. And one day, they were going to come back. Not out of guilt. Not out of love. But because suddenly, it was convenient. By the time Ayan turned 12, I had convinced myself that the past had settled into something permanent, something quiet enough to never come back and disturb what we had built. Life had become structured, almost predictable in a way I used to think was impossible. I had worked my way up from exhausting part-time shifts to a stable administrative job at a private school, the same school Ayan attended on a discounted staff arrangement. It wasn't the future I had once dreamed of, but it was stable, and stability became its own kind of victory. Our mornings started early, with rushed breakfasts and half-finished conversations, and ended late with homework, dinners, and the small comfort of knowing we had made it through another day together. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and more importantly, it was ours. Ayan had grown into the kind of boy people noticed without him trying. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but there was a quiet sharpness to him, an awareness that made teachers pause and classmates listen. He asked questions most kids didn't think to ask, and he understood things faster than I could keep up with sometimes. I saw pieces of myself in him, the resilience, the independence, but there was also something else, something deeper that I couldn't fully explain. It made me proud, but it also scared me, because I knew the smarter he became, the closer he would get to asking the one question I had spent years carefully avoiding. That question came on an ordinary evening, the kind that doesn't warn you before it changes everything. We were sitting at the small dining table, papers scattered everywhere as I helped him review for an upcoming exam. He had been quieter than usual, his focus drifting in and out, his pencil tapping lightly against the table in a rhythm that told me his mind was somewhere else. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just stress or fatigue, but then he suddenly stopped, looked up at me, and asked, "Amy, is there something you've never told me about my family?" The words landed heavier than anything he had ever said before, and for a moment, I felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. I tried to keep my expression steady, forcing a small smile as if the question didn't shake me. "Why would you ask that?" I replied, hoping to buy myself time, hoping he might brush it off and move on like he had years ago. But he didn't. He leaned back slightly, studying me in that way he did when he was piecing things together. "Because things don't add up," he said calmly. "Other kids talk about baby pictures, about when they were born, about relatives visiting when they were little. You don't talk about any of that. And Nana and Nanny," he hesitated for a second, choosing his words carefully. "They act like they're trying too hard when they come around. Like they're pretending something." His words cut deeper than I expected, not because they were harsh, but because they were accurate. I had spent years building a version of the truth that was simple enough for him to accept but vague enough to protect him, and now that version was starting to fall apart under the weight of his awareness. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Every answer I considered felt incomplete, like it would only lead to more questions I wasn't ready to answer. "I'm not asking because I'm upset," he added quietly, his voice softer now. "I just want to know the truth." That made it worse. Because he deserved it. And I had always known this day would come, I just wasn't ready for it to come like this, without warning, without preparation. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, I didn't see the little boy I had raised anymore. I saw someone who was strong enough to handle the truth, even if that truth might change everything between us. "There are things I haven't told you," I admitted finally, my voice slower, heavier than usual. "Not because I wanted to lie to you, but because I wanted to protect you until you were old enough to understand." I paused, watching his reaction, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression steady, patient. "But some truths, they don't stay hidden forever." He nodded slightly, as if he already understood that much. Before I could continue, my phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment in a way that felt almost deliberate. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be something unimportant, a work message, a reminder, anything that could wait. But the second I saw the name, everything inside me froze. Layla. For a split second, I thought I was imagining it. That somehow my mind had conjured it out of the fear and tension already building inside me. But the name was real, staring back at me like something pulled from a past I had worked so hard to bury. I hadn't heard from her in over a decade. Not a message. Not a call. Not even a passing acknowledgement that the life she walked away from still existed. And now, suddenly, she was reaching out. "Are you going to answer that?" Ayan asked, his voice pulling me back into the moment. I realized I had been staring at the screen too long, my silence already raising questions I couldn't afford to answer yet. I locked the phone without responding, placing it face down on the table. "It's nothing important," I said quickly, even though the tension in my voice betrayed me. Ayan didn't look convinced, but he didn't push, at least not right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair again, his eyes still on me, still searching. "You were saying," he prompted gently. But I couldn't continue. Not now. Not with that name still echoing in my mind, reopening doors I had spent years keeping shut. "We'll talk about it soon," I said instead, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I promise." He held my gaze for a moment longer, as if weighing whether to accept that answer. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay. But I could tell he wasn't satisfied. And neither was I. Because deep down, I already knew that whatever truth I had been trying to control, was no longer mine to decide. That night, long after Ayan had gone to sleep, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, my phone still resting on the table in front of me. The message notification was still there, unread, waiting. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my mind racing through every possible reason she could have reached out after all this time. Guilt didn't make sense. Regret didn't fit her. Which left only one possibility. She wanted something. And whatever it wasn't going to be small. With a slow breath, I finally unlocked my phone and opened the message. It was short. Too short. Hi. I think it's time I meet my son. I read it once. Then again. And again. Each time, the words felt heavier, sharper, like they were trying to force their way into a life she had no right to claim anymore. My son. After 12 years of silence, that was what she chose to say. Not your son. Not how he is. Just a statement. A claim. Like she had been there all along. Like she hadn't disappeared the moment things became inconvenient. Something inside me shifted then, not fear, not confusion, but something colder. Something clearer. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the same person she had walked away from. Back then, I had been forced into a decision. This time, I wouldn't be. I didn't reply that night. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and it wouldn't help anything. Anger has a way of making things messy, and messy was the last thing I could afford right now. This wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. So instead, I waited. And as expected, she didn't. The second message came the next morning while I was packing Ayan's lunch, my hands moving on autopilot as my phone buzzed against the counter. I'll be in town next week. We should meet. It's important. There it was. Not a request. A decision. The same tone. The same entitlement. Like the past 12 years were just a gap in conversation, not a lifetime she chose to miss. I stared at the message for a long moment before locking my phone again, my jaw tightening slightly. Some people don't change. They just learn better timing. Amy? Ayan's voice pulled me back as he walked into the kitchen, his bag slung over one shoulder. You okay? I forced a small smile, turning toward him. Yeah. Just thinking about work. He studied me for a second longer than usual. He didn't say it, but I could tell he didn't believe me. That made two of us. All day, I couldn't focus. Every small task felt heavier, slower, like my mind was split in two, one part going through the motions, the other replaying that message over and over again. Not the words themselves, but what they meant. She wasn't asking to reconnect. She wasn't apologizing. She was re-entering. And that difference mattered more than anything. By the time I got home that evening, I had already made one decision. If this was going to happen, it would happen on my terms. Not hers. I replied that night. Short. Controlled. If you want to meet, we meet in public. You don't contact him directly. Not now. I stared at the message for a second before sending it, knowing this was the first line I was drawing, not just for her, but for myself. Her response came almost instantly. Of course. I understand. Thank you. I actually paused at that. It was polite. Too polite. And somehow, that made it worse. We met 3 days later at a quiet cafe across town. I got there early. Not because I was nervous, but because I needed to be steady before she walked in. I sat at a table near the window, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I hadn't touched, watching people pass by like it was just another ordinary afternoon. And then she arrived. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked completely different, but because she looked finished. Polished. Like someone who had carefully built a life that left no room for anything messy or inconvenient. Her clothes were expensive without trying too hard, her posture confident, her expression composed. She looked like someone who had never lost anything. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from me like we were meeting after a short break, not over a decade of silence. I didn't smile. "You said this was important." She nodded, folding her hands neatly on the table. "It is." There was no hesitation in her. No awkwardness. No guilt. Just intention. "I've been thinking about this for a while," she continued. "And I've realized, it's time I step back into his life." There it was again. That word. Step back. Like she had never been there to begin with. "You don't get to step back into something you walked away from," I said calmly, even though I could feel the tension tightening in my chest. She didn't react the way I expected. No defensiveness. No argument. Just a small, measured nod. "I understand why you'd feel that way," she said. "But things are different now." I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms. "Different how?" "I'm stable. I have a career. A home. I can offer him things you can't." The words landed exactly how she intended them to. Not loud. Not aggressive. But sharp. Calculated. And that's when I understood. She didn't come back for him. She came back because now, he was worth something. "You think this is about what you can offer him?" I asked quietly. "I think it's about what's best for him," she replied smoothly. "And the truth is, he deserves to know where he comes from." I let out a small breath, shaking my head slightly. "He does know where he comes from." She tilted her head. "Does he?" That question hung in the air longer than it should have. Because for the first time in this entire conversation, she had found a crack. Not in my control. But in my timing. "You haven't told him, have you?" she added, her voice softer now. But there was something underneath it. Something almost satisfied. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew. "That's going to be a problem," she said gently, like she was pointing out something obvious. "Because if you don't tell him, I will." There it was. Not a threat. Not directly. But close enough. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping. "You don't get to walk into his life after 12 years and decide what he deserves. And you don't get to hide the truth from him forever," she replied, just as calm. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was loaded, like both of us were measuring the next move carefully. "You want to meet him," I said finally. "Yes." "Then you wait." Her expression shifted slightly for the first time. Not anger, but impatience. "For how long?" "For as long as it takes for me to tell him the truth properly," I said. "Not the way you want. Not when it's convenient for you." She studied me for a second, then leaned back, exhaling softly. "That's fair," she said. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Because it sounded like agreement, but it felt like a strategy. That night, I didn't wait. I couldn't. Ayan was sitting in the living room, flipping through his notes, completely unaware that the ground under his life was about to shift. I sat down across from him, my hands clasped tightly together, trying to find the right way to start something that had no easy beginning. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up immediately. Seriously. Focused. Ready. And in that moment, I realized something that made everything heavier. I wasn't just telling him the truth. I was risking everything we had built on it. "There's something about your past, about your family," I began slowly. "Something I should have told you earlier." He didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Just listened. And somehow, that made it harder. You're not just my son, I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. Not by birth. The silence that followed felt endless. But he didn't look shocked. He didn't look confused. If anything, he looked like he had been expecting it. I know, he said quietly. That stopped me. What? I didn't know everything, he continued, meeting my eyes steadily. But I knew there was something. I just didn't know what. I swallowed slowly, trying to steady myself. Your biological mother. I hesitated. But this time, I didn't stop. Is my sister. The words finally landed. And this time, I saw it. Not confusion. Not anger. But something deeper. Something that told me this wasn't the moment everything broke, it was the moment everything changed. Because what he said next wasn't what I was prepared for. Is she the one who texted you? For a second, I couldn't answer him. Not because I didn't want to, but because the realization hit me all at once. He had been watching me more closely than I ever understood. Every pause, every deflection, every moment I thought I had hidden well enough, he had noticed. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady but quieter than before. She reached out. Ion didn't react the way most people would expect. He didn't get emotional. He didn't ask a dozen questions. Instead, he leaned back slightly, absorbing it in silence, the same way he always processed things, slowly, carefully, completely. And she wants to meet me, he said, not as a question, but as a conclusion. Yes. Another pause. Then, are you going to let her? That question carried more weight than anything else he had asked that night. Because it wasn't just about permission, it was about trust. About whether I would hold on too tightly, or give him the space to choose for himself. I'm not going to decide that for you, I said after a moment. But I won't let anyone walk into your life and confuse you or hurt you. Not even her. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. I want to meet her, he said. The words landed harder than I expected, but not for the reason I feared. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't far. It was a curiosity. Closure. Something he needed for himself, not because of anything she had suddenly decided. Okay, I replied, forcing myself to stay calm. But we do it together. And we do it my way. He gave a small, almost reassuring nod. Your way. The meeting was set for the following weekend. Public place. Controlled environment. No surprises, that's what I told myself, over and over again. But deep down, I knew better. People like Layla didn't rely on chance. They created moments. And she had been waiting far too long for this one. When we arrived at the venue, a modest but elegant event hall, I immediately felt something was off. It was too prepared. Too polished. Like this wasn't just a meeting. It was a setup. Amy, Ion said quietly beside me, noticing it too. I see it, I replied under my breath. Before I could process it further, the lights dimmed slightly, and a small crowd's attention shifted toward the center of the room. That's when I saw her. Standing near a decorated table. With a cake. My chest tightened. No. Not like this. Surprise, she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention, a smile perfectly placed on her face as if she had rehearsed this moment. I thought we could make this special. I didn't move. Neither did Ion. The cake sat there between us, pristine and deliberate, with words written in bold icing that made my stomach turn. Congratulations, from your real mother. There it was. Not a conversation. Not an introduction. A claim. Public. Calculated. Impossible to ignore. Murmurs spread quietly around the room, people exchanging looks, curiosity building like she had intended. She hadn't just come back, she had built a stage. And she expected me to react. To get emotional. To lose control. Because that's how she thought she would win. But she didn't understand something. I wasn't that person anymore. Before I could say anything, I felt Ayan step forward slightly beside me. "Can I?" he asked quietly. I turned to him, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "But I want to." There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before, not uncertainty, not confusion, but clarity. I nodded slowly, stepping back just enough to let him take the lead. And that's when everything shifted. Ayan walked forward, calm and composed, his eyes fixed on Layla as if he had already decided something long before this moment. The room fell quieter with each step he took, every bit of attention now fully locked onto him. Layla's smile widened slightly, relief flickering across her face like she thought this was going exactly as planned. "Ayan," she said warmly, opening her arms slightly. "Hi. I've waited so long to meet you." He stopped a few feet away from her. Didn't hug her. Didn't step closer. Just looked at her. "You're my biological mother," he said, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. A small ripple moved through the crowd. Layla nodded quickly, almost eagerly. "Yes. Yes, I am." Another pause. Then Ayan glanced at the cake. "Read it. Let the word sit." And then, slowly, he looked back at her. "I have a question," he said. "Anything," she replied, confident again. His voice didn't change. "Where were you?" That was it. No anger. No shouting. Just 4 words. But they hit harder than anything else could have. Layla's expression shifted for the first time, just slightly. Enough for me to see it. Enough for everyone paying attention to notice something wasn't aligning with the perfect moment she had planned. Things were complicated, she began carefully. "I wasn't in a position to, for 12 years? Ayan asked, still calm. Still steady. She faltered. "Just for a second. I wanted to come back when I could give you a better life," she said, adjusting quickly. "I didn't want to come back empty-handed." Ayan nodded slowly, like he was considering it. Then he asked the question she wasn't ready for. "Better than what?" Silence. Real silence this time. Because suddenly, the narrative she had built didn't have a place to stand. "You think I needed saving," he continued, his voice still even, but sharper now. "From what? From the person who stayed?" I felt something in my chest tighten, not fear, not anxiety, something else. Something like pride. Layla tried to recover, her tone softening. "That's not what I meant. I wanted to give you opportunities. I already have them," he said simply. Another pause. Then he took a small step back. "I'm glad I met you," he added. "Because now I know." Her expression flickered. "Know what?" And this time, Ayan didn't hesitate. "That being a parent isn't about showing up when it's convenient," he said. "It's about being there when it's not." The words settled over the room like a final answer. No shouting. No drama. Just the truth. He turned slightly, looking back at me, not for approval, not for reassurance, but with a quiet certainty that told me he had already made his decision. And in that moment, everything she had tried to take, slipped out of her hands completely. Because she didn't lose him in that room. She lost him years ago. The moment she walked away. And no amount of timing, or planning, could ever undo that. The room didn't erupt the way people expect in moments like that. There was no dramatic shouting. No instant chaos. No loud confrontation that people could talk about later like a spectacle. Instead, there was something far more powerful. Silence. The kind that lingers. The kind that forces people to sit with what they just witnessed, whether they want to or not. Conversations didn't start again right away. No one rushed to fill the space. Because what Ayan had said didn't need noise, it settled on its own, heavy and undeniable. Layla stood there, still holding on to the version of the moment she thought she had control over, but it was already slipping away from her. You could see it in the way her posture shifted slightly, the way her expression struggled to stay composed while something underneath it cracked. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Not for her. She had planned a reveal. What she got was the truth. And the truth doesn't bend just because someone arrives late with better timing. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one defending, explaining, or justifying. I simply stood there, watching the outcome of something I had carried alone for over a decade finally speak for itself. Ayan didn't look back again. That was the part that stayed with me the most. Not because it was cold, but because it was final. We left quietly. No scene. No last words. No need to claim anything or prove anything further. The moment had already done that for us. As we stepped out into the evening air, the noise of the outside world felt almost strange, like we had walked out of something contained, something intense that hadn't quite reached the rest of the world yet. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ayan exhaled slowly, like he had just set something down that he had been carrying longer than either of us realized. "You okay?" I asked, glancing at him. He nodded. "Yeah." Another pause. Then he added, "I thought I'd feel more, something." I understood what he meant. Sometimes clarity doesn't come with big emotions, I said. Sometimes it just feels quiet. He looked at me for a second, then gave a small nod. Yeah. Quiet. But it wasn't empty. It was settled. The fallout didn't take long. By the next day, messages started coming in. First from my parents. Short. Careful. Like they were trying to understand what had happened without directly acknowledging their role in any of it. You could have handled that differently. She didn't deserve to be embarrassed like that. It's still her child. I read every message. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to respond immediately. Because something had shifted, not just in that room, but in me. For years, I had carried their expectations like they were obligations. Their decisions like they were mine to fix. Their version of family like it was something I had to preserve at any cost. But standing there, watching Ayan speak. Not out of anger, not out of influence, but from his own understanding, I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. I had already done enough. More than enough. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for how that moment unfolded. So I replied with one sentence. He chose for himself. And then I put my phone down. Layla didn't message again. Not immediately. Not with an apology. Not with anger. And somehow, that silence said more than anything she could have written. Because people like her don't disappear quietly when things don't go their way. They regroup. They rethink. They try again, just differently. And I knew that. But I also knew something else now. This time, she wasn't dealing with the same people she left behind. Weeks passed. Then months. Life didn't return to normal. It moved forward. And there's a difference. Ayan became more open after that night, not about everything, but about the things that mattered. He asked questions, not out of confusion anymore, but out of understanding. About choices. About people. About why some stay and others don't. We talked more. Honestly. Without holding things back the way I used to. And in a strange way, that moment, the one I had feared for years, didn't break anything between us. It strengthened it. Because the truth didn't take me away from him. It showed him exactly why I never did. My parents tried to visit a few times after that. At first, I kept the distance polite. Short conversations. Neutral tones. No arguments. But boundaries have a way of becoming clearer once you finally set them. You're always welcome to see him, I told them during one visit, my voice calm but firm. But not if you're going to rewrite what happened. Not if you're going to pretend this was anything other than what it was. They didn't argue. But they didn't fully accept it either. And for once, that was okay. Because acceptance wasn't something I needed from them anymore. Nearly a year later, Ayan stood on another stage. Different from the one Layla had chosen. This one, he earned. Awards. Recognition. A future that was entirely his. I sat in the audience, watching him walk across with the same quiet confidence he had always carried, and for a moment, everything else faded. The past. The sacrifices. The things I lost. None of it felt heavy anymore. Because standing there, in that moment, I realized something simple, but powerful. I didn't give up my future that night all those years ago. I just built a different one. As we walked out after the ceremony, Ayan glanced at me, a small smile on his face. You know, he said casually, people kept asking me today where I get my mindset from. I raised an eyebrow slightly. And what did you tell them? He shrugged, like it was obvious. The person who showed up. That was it. No long speech. No dramatic acknowledgement. Just the truth. And somehow, it meant more than anything else ever could. Some stories end with revenge. With loud victories and visible losses. But this one didn't. Because the real ending wasn't about what Layla lost. It was about what she could never take back. Time. Presence. The quiet, consistent choice to stay. And in the end, that was the only thing that ever mattered.